So today we get to sit down with a truly fascinating human being, a man whose job I still don't exactly understand, but who has worked with companies such as, let's run through this list, eBay, Zillow, Nike, Magneto, Microsoft, Oregon State University, Keen, Adidas, and currently I think works with the Apple innovation team. So he does something pretty impressive and creative, and hopefully today we're going to try to figure out exactly what that is. But today we're sitting down with a good friend of mine that I've gotten to know over the last couple of years, Ron Sparks.
Hey Charlie, how's it going?
Fantastic.
Cool.
So I still, even after all this time, don't actually fully understand what it is you do. And let me start by looking at your website, right at the top it says, I lead companies and teams to remap and reimagine product experience.
Yeah.
And the tagline under that is exploring human experience in the age of automation.
Yeah, so that's like the thesis I had last year. If you can have a personal thesis, I don't know if that's the right usage, but it was, we're in this age of automation. Technology is sort of integrated into everything, so much so that it's like almost odd to say like technology because everything now has technology in it.
Mm-hmm.
We don't say it like as a weird maybe point, but like back in the day it was like railroads and phones were technology. Now we don't call them technology, they just are. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's starting to happen again. And so I was just looking at that, like in the age of automation, as machines get better at being machines, where do we fit as humans? How do humans get better at being human? I think that's like kind of an answer implied. And so that's just what I was thinking about. And so what I do is, like a lot of people, I actually have a day job, but that's not like what I write or think about as much.
Okay.
And so I have a day job as leading product design for a point of sale company. What's cool about that is, it fills my week massively, sometimes more than I want, morning to night. And I work with a team around the world. So I work with developers in the Ukraine. We've got a headquarters in Florida. Our main clients in Japan. So I'm working with this international team on design and technology. And so it means like the view that I get of technology is not just US centric. And so it's pretty cool. So I have a day job of making digital product. That's what I do. But outside of that, like when we ask what somebody does, we talked about it before the camera started rolling. There's this like tendency for people to say like, what do you do? And if it's outside of a marketing event, a lot of times I've kind of felt like it's a way to gauge someone's social value. Like I want to know what you do. Yeah. Because then I want to know if you're interesting. And if you're interesting or you do something valuable, then I want to talk to you more. If not, then I don't want to talk to you. And then the problem is right now in our current culture is that we assign value to the status of your job title. But the world is now changing, and like even the way companies work, job titles have changed. Somebody here in town actually said something to me that's like stuck with me, which is if you want to like climb the ladder at a job, then like you need a job title. But if you want to be an entrepreneur, you don't need a job title. Nobody cares. Mm-hmm. The what do you do always felt like a social, like what's your social value question?
I agree with that 100%.
Yeah, so oftentimes like somebody will ask that, and I don't want to say like I work for X company doing X thing around the world. Like, yeah, that's interesting. And if we're at a marketing event, it's appropriate. But if I'm in a conversation at a coffee shop or somebody's getting to know me, then that's where like, well, I have this whole other thing that I consider like my work as a person. And my work as like, if I could say I'm an artist, then like there's that work. And that's the stuff that you're reading and thinking about. And that's what I do. And that's what I do in my job, and that's what I do out of my job.
Well, and that's exactly one of the things I'm curious about is you seem very passionate about exploring how the technology and the apps and the products that we are building are affecting human society and culture and how it affects people and how that information can be manipulated or how people can be manipulated by using that information in certain ways. And
definitely.
And you seem very concerned with where that's going.
Yeah. So, do you know how many people have Facebook?
No.
But what would be the guess?
Like tens of millions.
Tens of millions. It's like over 2 billion now, right?
Okay.
So like when you think of percent of the world people using one platform, it's huge. And that's like one example. So like another challenge is when we think about like technology stories or impact, like we'll think Apple, Google, Facebook, and it's true, but those are like these behemoths. And so like they have their own set of problems at scale. But what's also interesting is like, and Instagram's another one of those, but we have these companies that start out with a few people, maybe like, 1 to 10 to 13 people can start a company that then has hundreds of millions of users or even 1 million users.
Right.
So the scale of impact from what you can make to who you can reach is like really big, more people than you can ever know. And so part of the question that like one of the curious questions I have is like, what's our responsibility then as makers in the technology space to those people or to that scale? And, right now we're just making and disrupting, and there's this really interesting, I can't remember his name, but he writes a book about like, the machine age. And he talks about how Silicon Valley has become like the Rome of the world, and all these digital roads lead back to there. And so they're impacting these economies all around the world. And really it doesn't come back to like a nation state or something. It comes back to this like one little corner of the planet.
Right, which is a tiny number of people.
Yeah,
in the
and that's getting
picture.
distributed. There are other places now where, there's places in Israel and there's places in Ireland. Like, there's places all over the world where innovation's happening, and like, I have a US centric view, so I'm going to think of those places first.
Right.
But there's these little pockets all over the world, and there's like commerce going back to all those places for the impact that they're having and the disruption they're doing. And so I just think it's worth asking, like, as a maker in the world with that much reach, like, what's my responsibility to the people I'm making for, and to the communities that we're impacting? And maybe it won't change anything right away, but like at least ask the question. And so I think it'd be a great idea if the people that are making products in these large companies with lots of scale just ask those questions, because it may change a little bit of what you do. I don't know. I also think of like all these questions end up going down to like, capitalism, and like we're in this system.
Right.
It's like, I get it, but we can't burn the whole thing.
Right.
I mean, maybe theoretically you could, but that's not likely. So I'm really curious about like, well, how do we change like subversion? How do we do art inside the machine? Like, how do we get the people that are making stuff to think about what they're making so they can exert their power and their caring on the products they make? So.
Well, in one of it was in one of your posts, and you say, measuring usefulness is much harder than measuring usage.
Yeah.
And that seemed to be a big thing for you of the impact, positive and negative, that an app, a technology, a thing.
Yeah, so when you start to think about like how, like what a product does, right? Like when you open up an app, and a lot of us still have social media, I'm still trying to turn off more of it, but it's
Right.
It's hard because I also want to know what's going on and be connected to the world from our small pocket. But those things really are built to keep you just scrolling. And so what that takes is time. And so the easiest thing to measure, like as a product maker, is like, are they using it? Are they clicking it? Are they looking at it? And that's
How
what we're
long
told
are
to
they
do.
using it?
Yeah, so if you're making something as a creative, like that's also what you're doing. Like I'm writing something, I want to know how many people are watching it or reading it. And so if I make something, that's the easiest thing to do, because I can get a remote, like this passive metric where I can know like how many people looked at something.
Right.
What's harder to do, a lot harder, is to know if it's useful. And so in that article, I did quote, I think his last name was Harrison, but he started this sort of it's like a group that was going out to figure out how to measure usefulness. And so one of their examples was from couchsurfing.com, right? So you could rent these couches or just stay at people's couches. And so what they did is they started surveying people like what was the positive experience? Like how much positive time did you have at a host's house? And which is really cool. So they were trying to measure like how much positive experience in time people gained. And then they would pit that against like, well, if it took you 30 minutes or an hour to get like to connect with someone and then get their couch so you could go stay there. That's like time that we took from you as a company for you to figure this out. So we took 1 hour from you. How much time did you get back, right? Did you get back 1 hour, or did you get back many hours? And so a lot of people would say like that they got 6 or 8 hours of, positive experience time, which is really useful time, but it's really hard to measure that because it's measuring something that's happening outside of the digital system. And so that's what's really hard to do. So if somebody's watching this and we want to know if they're getting value from it, like a watch doesn't tell us anything. Looking at it doesn't tell us anything. It's like, did you take something from this conversation and change the way you operate in the world? Like that's really powerful. That's a huge metric. How do you measure it? Is it a metric? I don't know. Yeah. So
on a scale of 1 to 10, how much did this change your world?
And so at scale for companies, that's really hard to do, and it takes more time. Although, as I say that, companies at scale may have actually more resources to decide to go do that than a small group of creatives trying to figure out, if you have 100 people reading something to go figure out, okay, did you actually change how you make things because you read this? That's hard to do.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And it seemed too that one of the things you've spent a lot of time thinking about, I'm curious too how all of this that you're thinking of in sort of the mile high big picture, how is this affecting humanity kind of view, I'm curious how that plays into what you do for your day job. But you've also written a lot about like how empathy has now been manipulated, or how empathy becomes manipulation.
Yeah, I'm still figuring that out. I think empathy is good. It's the gateway to compassion, right? And so I feel like a layperson in that space of understanding what empathy really is deeply and what compassion really is deeply. And compassion's hard because it sounds like such like the opposite of a technology word. It just sounds like a yoga ease word or a retreat word or something that you inscribe on your kitchen in a nice font,
that you have like on your refrigerator. In like
compassion.
Script.
Today I will care for others. Yes, I am grateful for it. But they're real good practices, and so I've been digging into that and sort of there's people doing research on the link between compassion and success and like what compassion really means. And so like a very basic understanding for me is that compassion means alleviating the suffering of others. And like in a simple term, it just means caring. But the difference between compassion and empathy from what I've been seeing is that compassion requires action. And so I think that's what a lot of people are looking for.
Okay.
So in the design community, there's this thing called design thinking, and it's used actually all over. And then different industries basically do the same thing. They just have other frameworks that they call it by.
Okay.
So so design thinking, and the first pillar of the process of doing design thinking is empathy. You want to understand others deeply.
Okay.
Because if you just care about somebody, you might not actually be able to help them like at all. There was an article by, it was somebody that works at IDEO, which is like one of the purveyors of design thinking. It's this cool design firm. And basically what they were pointing out is like, if you care about somebody but you don't understand them, then sometimes you can't actually help them. And so they were going around, and there was it was some kind of medicine, I can't fully remember, but they were like, the people that were compassionate about helping their clients, they were like, they have to like stick a needle in their arm multiple times a day to take this medicine, and it must just be like scary, and it's a sacred event, and like they had all these preconceived notions, and they wanted to go out and fix this problem because they really care about their patients.
Right.
But then when they went out and did the field research, what they realized is like people don't care. That it's become a habit. They just like they're on their phone, they're putting their medicine in, they don't even think about it. It's not scary. And so they were trying to care for them, but they didn't understand the problem. And so you need both the empathy and the compassion together. And it seems like what I'm curious about though, like how does empathy become manipulation? Like why would someone ever say that? It's that when you're in a small group of people doing design, it's pretty easy to care about people, and it seems like it's easy to have that conversation. And when you talk about empathy, compassion seems to be implied, that like we have empathy and we're helping people. Mm-hmm. But at scale, empathy is like in a system seems to become just knowing people or knowing about them rather than knowing them. And so that's where it's like, well, if we know how people work, then we can get them to do something. And so I worked in a technology company, and I remember sitting around a table and we were talking about these experiences where we could know where one user was and if they were with someone else using that app, and if, you know, it was a time of day near a location of something, we could sell them, right? And then we were imagining that we could also know like their lifetime value as a customer, how much they would spend. That's very common in the land of digital marketing. But then you could also start to infer based on spending patterns, like when they're most likely to buy, right? That becomes very manipulative all of a sudden. And in the land of technology, there's this language we use because I'm in the land of technology. And people phrase it as their guests, right? And so like we're just trying to be good hosts. Like there's this like, oh, we care. And it just started to look like we didn't really care. It was just some language to make us feel okay, like we care. And so it's like, well, they're a guest, and when they walk into the digital store, it should be optimized for them, which is true, that's fine. But it becomes really creepy at a point where if you were to come over to my house and I like had your favorite music playing, I had your favorite food, I had changed the art out, like you'd start to be like, what? What's going on here, Ron?
Like you're wearing a shirt I just bought myself.
And then suddenly I tell you that you can buy all the plates. This is amazing. And you're like, I thought we were just hanging out. So I think it's like we've gone way beyond the idea of someone's a guest and we want to take care of them. And we've, you know, it's that high end, it's a store, right? That's the idea, is to sell someone something. So, you know, I don't want to like lie to myself that we're not trying to sell stuff.
Right.
But at some point we have to start asking the questions about the tools we have and if it's okay and if we've gone too far. And so one of the analogies that I've thought about is like if your doctor knew that you had diabetes and they decided to try and sell you donuts instead of tell you that you had diabetes, that would be wrong. And doctors have ethical rules around that. And I don't know, like, we're still figuring out what that is in the world of design and technology. I mean, there's some stuff there, and there are definitely groups of people that are working on that. But it is possible that an advertising agency might know that like someone is overweight, they spend a ton of money, and they're trying to do X, and instead of like giving them a real solution, they just try and sell them, you know, down that hole. And so I'm just curious, like, is there a way, like, how do you stop that? Or how do you like give people a better framework of thinking? Or how do you impact a system? And, you know, so I have some ideals. I don't think that that's the world that will come about very rapidly. But if we can infect the people making stuff at scale with ideas of compassion or caring or, you know, just asking some of these questions, maybe it'll change, you know, some of what we're making. Maybe not, but it's a hope. So that's the world I want. So that's the world that I'll push forward and explore. Yeah.
Does that play out in your day job, so to speak?
Yeah.
Like,
So,
are you the advocate for like compassionate design, or?
I mean, no is the easy answer. Like, probably not. Like, it's an idea. I mean, you know, in a sense, like I care about the people we're making stuff for. I feel a little bit fortunate in I'm not in a consumer product space. Like, I'm in a business space, so that business has, you know, bought our product because it solves their problem. And so we're really specifically designing and making stuff for them, and there's an even exchange of, you know, money value, which is makes it more simple in a way.
You know they're getting utility out of this because they're willing to buy it.
The question is way harder when you're working in a space where you're essentially selling advertising time, because at some point it becomes like, well, maybe the business model just doesn't work this way. And I think that's what a lot of people would say or would argue is like, that's nice, Ron, but like not practical unless we're going to change the business model. And maybe the business models do change, I don't know. But yeah, so for me, like, that's exactly the question. Like, cool idea, like, how do I bring it down to my personal life? That's always, you know, one of the questions. So like mentoring students or other groups is like an outlet for that. It doesn't all happen in my job. Caring about the people that I'm making stuff for and my team members. You know, when you're slogging through a big project, sometimes you kind of get in this place where you might just want to say, yeah, let's do what you requested and let's ship it, rather than like exploring if that's really the right solution and then, you know, doing the harder work to keep caring. But if I stop caring about the work I'm doing, then like I should probably go do something else. So yeah, I don't know. That's yeah, that's a hard question.
But it seems like those are the, I mean, just looking at your blog, like if I look at the categories on your blog, I describe it as your blog. I mean, it is your website. But
Yeah,
it
it's a
seems
website.
like it's mostly
design,
there for you to communicate your ideas.
Yeah, definitely.
But like your categories are creative condition, cutting edge strategy, design, execution, and the future.
The future.
Yeah, I was very curious. I was like, well, let's go to the future. Let's see what Ron predicts.
Did it take you to a new website?
Yeah,
Welcome to the new internet. Yeah.
Right, by 2050, we'll be doing this.
Yeah, that's it's my utopian vision. You can
Right,
sign up.
yeah.
It's only $750,000.
Right.
You get a first ticket to space on a space company I haven't yet invented.
Yeah, right. But it's coming
yeah.
because you can see the future.
Yep.
So you're taking reservations now.
Yeah. What's funny is like I'm probably like a lot of creatives, and that I like struggle with like what to call the things I'm making. And so creative condition is interesting to me. Like early on it was like creative leadership, and I was like, that term sounds so corporate now, and like what's creative leadership? And I started to think about what I was really writing about in that section, and I was like, I'm kind of talking about the environment that it takes to be creative in. And so then I changed it to creative condition, like what are the things that I need and what's the space I need to be creative in.
Right.
And so yeah, there's a lot of the day job work I do, but then I also have like, I'm always working on some kind of side hustle at the same time. And so sometimes that's in the form of a company or a project that has some sort of commerce component to it, little startup ideas. And it also takes the form of like when I was at eBay, on the side I learned how to make a mobile game and put out a mobile game for no reason, like just for kicks, because it was a cool medium to work in.
Right.
So yeah, it's, there's always something on the side of the day job. And then part of that is finding a space to collaborate with people on, got some ideas, like how do I bring those into the real world with projects or people?
Right.
Yeah.
So I wanna sort of integrate like what we're talking about in your current life, but also jump back to like you said in another blog post that you had dropped out of college because you were, sounds like, being pretty successful in web design, web development.
You would think that's what it was.
Yeah. Am I making the wrong
people's
assumption
parents
there?
would hope that there was a monetary reason. No. So I actually got asked by some friends to go.
This is back when you were in
college? This is back, when I was in college for 2 terms, way back in the day.
Two whole
terms.
semesters?
I took 2 semesters of art history, actually, which was great.
Yeah.
I'll explain that, and then we'll drop back a little bit more. So I dropped out of college because some friends of mine got signed to a band, and they were going to be traveling the country on a tour bus. And they said, do you want to come be like our roadie? You can sell merch. We'll pay you $50 a day. So I said,
That's
$50
awesome.
a day to travel the country? I'm in.
Right.
And I actually had a full ride to the community college. I was like the student body leadership council president or something. But the leadership people at the college were crazy. I remember this person running around. She was walking around, hands up, yelling at people about budget. This was the adult in the room.
This
and I was
wasn't
like,
a student.
No, this wasn't
like
a student. This was like the person
adult.
leading the leadership people.
Okay.
And like
good leadership example there.
Just kind of crazy. And I was like, I don't really want to be part of this.
Right.
And that happened for a couple weeks, and then we had this like summer break, and we were supposed to come back and do stuff. And that was like the environment. And so, I just decided like, okay, I'll drop out and I'll make websites and I'll travel the country. I actually started making websites in high school, and I made them mostly for bands, and then a few times it was like for, parents of friends that wanted a small website, and that's what I started doing. So when I turned 18, I was like, I'm going to start a business, and I went to the courthouse here in Oregon and got my LLC, and like I started a business. And so that's what I did at 18. And so at the time I was in college, I was like, I can drop out. I'll just freelance and do websites. Because that's the world that we had like entered into, is this place where you could make your own job, which was really cool. So that's kind of how I ended up dropping out of college and traveled the country. I saw all the like 13
and make websites on the side.
Yeah, it worked pretty good. It worked pretty good.
That's a pretty compelling, like, I can see when you're 18, 19, you're like, sounds like a plan to me.
Yeah, and then I came back and just worked in a cafe and talked to people and handed out business cards, and like that's how I got my initial work, was just like learning how to talk to people and hand out business cards. I would keep them in my apron. And then just like, if somebody, like, I learned this trick where, I forgot about this actually, I would ask somebody like, so what do you do? And they would tell me, and then they would say, well, what do you do besides, this? And I'd say, oh, actually, I make websites. And then I'd hand them my card and their coffee, and like, I'd just sit there and do that. Yeah.
That's awesome.
So that was like early days, yeah.
And then that, I guess, just going down that rabbit hole led you further and further. Now it seems that you function in a more sort of, certainly in a higher plane than just like web design, web development. It sounds like it's much more conceptual. Yeah,
I do zero web design at this point, except for myself. Like,
right.
And I got to do a project with professor here in town, Kyle Fletcher. We did some digital work that actually ended up in a museum, and that was like really fun to explore a little space. And we were playing with like how machines change language, and one of the things that happens in artificial intelligence, I just find this stuff fascinating. So like, then I just want to like find out more about it. So we built this really simple tool, which basically you would talk out loud around this screen. It would take in your language, convert it into like, I don't know, pick out some verbs and nouns and stuff. And then it would do an image search and return like GIFs related to what you were saying.
Okay.
So you could be talking about California, and you would start getting all these images of California on the screen.
Okay.
And you're just around it. So it was this interesting reflecting mirror. But what was cool about that as a concept was that in the world of machines that we live in, like, they have millions of inputs now, and they still only have one output to be right. So like, if you're talking to Siri and you say some stuff, like, it interprets it, it has all this like vast knowledge, and then its response is like, it has one shot to give you something meaningful. And I just thought that was really interesting. And in the land of something more abstract like images, we tend to assume machines are kind of smart now. And so like, when we get something back, like, we then interpret that as correct. So in the land of images, it was really interesting because the images that were returning to people were more abstract, but once you know the machine's like responding to you, you start interpreting those images as correct. So if you're talking about California and for some reason the machine shows a picture of trees, you'd probably assume like, well, it must be trees from California.
Okay.
But the machine could just be totally wrong. And I thought that was really interesting.
So sounds like what the compelling part of that is that we've sort of stopped questioning on some level the results we're getting from, the machines, the cloud, the internet.
Yeah, I didn't think about that, but yeah.
Take it for granted that it's right.
I guess so. Yeah. I mean, in a sense, that's. I guess we just put together this thing to see what would reflect back, and that was like one of those things. Is I guess we just take stuff for granted all the time. My map's going to the right place until you realize that the new Apple Maps doesn't have a gas station where you thought it was, and you're low on gas.
Right.
Which has happened to me twice. So I didn't use Apple Maps for like a couple of years till they got that fixed.
Now you're just bitter.
Now
you're just angry.
I'm just upset. Yeah. So I don't know. It's just like, it's kind of a strange thing to like just focus on concepts sometimes, because it feels like they become ideals that you're not able to enact. So part of the trick is like taking some idea that maybe is more global and then figuring out how to apply that down at a very practical level. And that's one of those thinking concepts I really like. I call it skydiving, right? Like, you have the 30,000 foot view, and then I want to go down all the way to the ground and know like, okay, well, like you said, well, so how do you implement compassion in your job? And that's, I think, exactly the right question for all the things that we might think of that are high-minded. It's like, how do we get to the like how I work as a person?
Right.
And that's like, I don't know how much you've read on philosophy. Have you read in the space of philosophy? Yeah, same amount as me. This much. Yeah. Okay. Then we can talk about it.
Right. We can both be totally wrong. Neither of us will know.
So early on, I remember thinking like, there's philosophers and then there's philosophies, and I always thought like philosophy was like how you think about something, and then I learned that there's this other way where philosophy means like the way you operate. And so it's not philosophy of like how I think about something, it's like philosophy of how I actually do things. And so there's a number of books on like the philosophy of life, and it's like how you live your life, not what you think about life.
Right.
And so a lot of these ideas, I started wondering like, oh, are these like, what's my philosophy of creativity? Not like, how do I do or think about creativity, but like, how do I do it? And so it's kind of the same question for any of the things that I guess I'm thinking about, is like, how do I not manipulate people with the work I'm doing, right? How do I have compassion in the work I'm doing? I don't know, how do I find out how to be a better human when I'm making tools that replace human in, with automation, or where's the space for a person in automation? So, yeah, that's a lot of the stuff.
And that's a phrase you've used repeatedly, is like, how do we as humans become better humans or more human in a world where so much of our day-to-day life is, like you've talked about how it's, how we're so affected by technology that sort of manipulates us and runs our day-to-day lives, and how the technology has taken over some roles that used to be for people.
Yeah.
So it's like, how do we become better people in the face of that?
Yeah, do
you have the answer yet, Ron?
Yes. No. There's so many thoughts. Like, one thought that popped in my head as you were saying that is like, oh yeah, the guy that invented the like button on Facebook, like he restricts his usage of social media, right? And you have a lot of these executives coming out of these social components that now are rejecting the things that they've made. Although I heard one person go in front of a bunch of students and start talking about how, like, just take all the money you can from the system, do the work, and then try and do good. And I was like, what? That's like steal stuff first and then do good with your stolen things. Like, I don't know. It just was, it's a weird time we live in. So people are trying to figure out, like, answers to that. And some of them are better than others. Sorry, I went way off track there.
But what you were just saying about, like, you like make your dollars, and then then go do good. It's like, haven't we already shown that doesn't pan out that way? Totally. Like, usually you're like 20 years in.
And I think that's like some of the grief of like that millennials get is like, I mean, there's a lot of questions of entitlement, and there's questions of like, they want to do good in the world. And I'm like, yeah, but that's like there's this pendulum swing in culture. And so, like, does that mean that like maybe the generation before didn't do good, and the generation before seemed to not care as much, and they got in debt more, and now there's this swing to say, well, I want the opposite of those things because that's what the generation before did, like, so I think there is this desire to do good now, but it's hard because we're not in a system that like rewards that or measures that, and like good is this weird amorphous term that's slightly different for different people. And technology is global, not national, not even regional. So like, we have all these like one tool being used by people all over the world, and everybody uses it in different ways. Not one tool, but there's like many technologies now that they're not tied to necessarily like one place anymore. So if you make something, it can be used in many different contexts all over the world, and like the needs of those people and what they see as good is going to be slightly different, and then there's all this tension around people trying to figure out what that is, and so online it's like super contentious now, because you have this tension around what people think is right and righteous and good, and there's just everyone in the world that disagrees with each other is like now in one place. So it's kind of interesting to watch that and wonder, like, can we improve that somehow?
And I'm sure there's a big component of folks that work in tech that are like, that's not the question we're here to answer. Like, we're not here to answer whether this is good or beneficial. We're here to do X more efficiently, or create a new system for doing Y. Or
totally. Whatever. And I don't really understand all that. So part of it feels like maybe I'm way in over my head even asking some of these questions, but they seem like we should at least start asking them. And maybe what's cool about online or putting your ideas into the world is that it's my idea, right? There's an idea of like, oh, if empathy becomes manipulation at scale, what does compassion become? And there's actually other questions around that. Well, empathy doesn't always become manipulation, just sometimes. So why is that? Or, compassion at scale can be corrupted too. It looks like this. Or compassion at scale in a good way looks like this. And there's so much I don't know, but by putting those ideas out into the world, then other people pick them up. They're no longer like connected to me, that it's just an idea.
Right.
Somebody else picks it up and they can play with it and send it back. And I think that's what's really, for all the talk of, there's two parts of the internet. One part is that like there's really big megaphones for small amounts of people that are doing bad, but there's also really big megaphones for people that need megaphones now. And there's like, there's good and bad all happening at the same time. Right. So, one solution is like burn the whole thing down, but then we lose all this other, goodness that's come out of it. So I think that's where we're at, is like we're trying to figure out like how do we put guardrails on this thing and keep people safe, but let us still drive cars. So
as opposed to just like blow up all the roads.
Yeah, blow up all the cars, we're done.
And we'll just fly from now on. Or something.
Well, maybe that's what we need to do. Right. Yeah. Everyone is a remote worker. Machines do all the lifting. So I don't know, I find it fascinating to explore that space.
Okay.
And then I guess, I don't know. There's just all these like dots that you can connect. And so that to me is super fascinating. Like I want to say as a creative person, but what's funny is as soon as I say that, Elizabeth Gilbert's quote of like saying creative people is redundant, like all people are creative.
All people are creative, right?
And so it's like yes and no, like there's everyone's creative and some people have forgotten, maybe is a better way to phrase it. So I like to find all the dots and then figure out how to like cross intersect them. And so when you're working in the space of innovation, like there's this, you're trying to disrupt, you're trying to come up with something new, and like innovation is like looking at the status quo, what is, and then like replacing that or breaking that or changing that. And so you can do that in a bunch of ways. So one of the easiest or most, I guess it's like an easy way to do it, which is sort of strange, is like to look at spaces that I know nothing about and then talk to people in those spaces and learn those concepts and then bring them back and contextualize them in my space. So that's like when you say there's like lots of little dots sometimes, that's like, I find it super fascinating to try and pull a bunch of dots together and then see like what something looks like or what's new between them.
Right.
Yeah.
Can you, like, I get the idea, the concept of what you're talking about. Within your field, within your job, like, is there an instance where that has actually played out, where you've?
Yeah. Now I'm trying to think. Well, so yeah, I did a side project that was pretty interesting. It was me and my friend Jimmy worked on a project where we wanted to mix. I don't know how to like phrase this, is the nexus of two evils, social media and real estate.
Okay.
So this is the nexus of two evils. And real estate agents didn't know how to like do social media essentially, or they'd pay a ton of money to other people to automate it. So all the automation was really spammy. And so we looked at the research and we saw that basically what was happening is real estate agents had more posts on average than any other industry vertical, but their engagement was the lowest. Okay. So it seemed pretty obvious that they're posting tons of stuff and like no one was interacting, right? It wasn't like ratcheting up. They were just like, well, I'll just keep throwing more stuff online into all the social medias. And so we were like, well, can we make a more authentic, can we make a more authentic content, Can we make more authentic content or help people do that? And would that be more engaging? And so when we started to help people make authentic content that they created or had a hand in, that was from their actual world instead of just stock reviews and stock photos and stock articles, engagement went way up. So it was like, okay, we're onto something. And then we built this tool that allowed real estate agents to basically just like, they would get prompts via text that would sort of prompt them for content. They would take a picture and send a caption. It would go out and they'd get some messages back. And then what would happen is a real human team would then like edit that content, and then they would hit a button and it would post to social media, and then the real estate agent would get a message back. So it was this like part automated, part human loop.
Okay.
And we built some really cool back end where like you could see when a human was responding or when a machine was responding. So it was kind of this cool like marriage of those ideas. And that was like pulling ideas from, the space of like automated messaging and the space of content writing and like what we saw happening in some areas of text and like mixing them together. And so that was kind of a cool thing to make. It turns out that it's not that valuable because it didn't have a direct path to impact. So, we ended up stopping the project. But yeah, so that was like one thing where you're just like mixing some other existing ideas together to make something new that changes how people work. And the people that used it really liked it.
Right.
Yeah, and I'm thinking like when I was at a former tech job, we would do this practice where you would just come up with like 50 ideas a week, like just 50 ideas. Didn't really matter if they were good. The idea was to get through all of the bad ideas to find the new ones. And so we would that's what we would do, just churn through ideas. And eventually you'd find something and you'd implement it. And then once you implement, you realize like the thing you made is not what people want, but you learn and then you adjust.
Right.
And that's the whole product development process in the technology space. Like you make something, you put it out, you see what's wrong with it, and then you just keep going through that loop. So.
Well, that was another thing you talked a lot about in one of your blogs, was iteration of like develop the idea and then keep developing variations of the idea. Yeah. If for no other reason than to see that the original idea was the right idea.
Yeah, so that's something that I do all the time in the day job and everywhere else. I can't remember what the phrase is, but it's like forcing yourself to find an additional option. So, when you're confronted, this all feels so abstract and I'm having a hard time like thinking of like something specific that I can say. But yeah, if you're building something, there's oftentimes, you've got all these limitations around the thing you're making, and so you have to solve these little problems all the time. And like that's what design is, you just solve these problems and communicate the intent. And so, the idea would be that you want to solve a problem, and so you come up with an idea, and a lot of times your first idea is actually really good and you could run with it. But I like to push that off the cliff and like take the idea further and then find out like why the bad ideas are bad, right? So at least come up with a couple other options. So if I have 3 options in my head out the gate, like force myself to find a 4th option, and maybe it won't work, but like then I can understand why it doesn't work.
Okay.
And that helps inform like my good decision is good because it's not these other things.
Okay.
So it's just sort of that, like how you process decisions. Yeah.
And so in the world where you move professionally, like what is someone looking for when they're like, we need to hire Ron Sparks, he is the man to do X?
People don't say that. They say, we couldn't get X.
Like, well, we couldn't get these 5 other guys.
Find someone cheaper.
I guess we'll just deal with
We
Ron.
need someone cheaper. Does anybody know?
Right.
So I, like I said, right now I work a full-time job. And then I generally work with people when there's two things that happen. One is they have an idea and they don't know how to make it. Like they have a technology idea, and then I'll get calls or people will text me like, somebody has an idea to make an app. Can you, like, we can talk about it, but that's such a broad thing to say. And so usually it's getting from I have an idea to made thing. I work in that space. And either you have an idea and you have a bunch of resources and you want to make a thing, or you have a bunch of resources and you want to like remake something. So it's remaking or making new things, and that's usually where I come in. So that's what happened with the group that I'm at now, is like it was time to remake the product, which was really awesome. And so I got to come in at this time where they had this, and I'm intentionally not talking a lot of specifics.
Sure, I get that, because
it was really awesome.
Sign non-disclosure agreements and stuff.
Yeah, and just being sensitive to the group that I care so much about.
Right.
So, there was just this awesome product that was like super robust, and so it was amazing, and a lot of people used it. But it was time to like take it to the next evolution of the product, and so I got to come in, and it's like one of my favorite things to do is like take what's there, pull it all apart, put all the pieces everywhere, and then map out what exists now. And then take that and remap it in a new way and say, okay, how do we take all these pieces and re-put them back together? And then, both in concept and then in a practical form of product design. So that was the work I got to do, and I love doing that. And so that's when I usually get a call. And then right now, like I mentor and work with a couple of small startups here in town. And so the idea there is that, they've got some idea and they need to know both like, well, how do we get to the essence of this idea? And then great, now that we better understand our idea, how do we work with a group of people to communicate what we really want? And there's a tendency, like when people have ideas, to overbuild. So you have this wonderful idea, and when you have an idea that's really big or has a really huge vision, like you can see like how it could be made and in all its facets. But to start, you always need this little tiny wedge to like start. And so a lot of times I just help people like make their wedge to get in the door or to start something and get it going. And then, once they're going, it can turn into something else. Yeah.
Okay. So that helps me understand some of what you do.
Yeah, and I work in the space of digital product for the most part.
Okay.
So there's like ideas that I have and I'd like to infect the world with and I'd like to have conversations about. And that's sort of in the realm of art. And then I make some things in that space. And then there's like this space of side projects. Sometimes they're companies, sometimes they're, just whatever seems appropriate to make. A lot of times though it's companies. And then there's like some mentoring or just working with other people that are up and coming. And that work is all in the space of almost exclusively like digital product. And it has to do with design and how you execute the design and how you get the talent. And so it's just like helping those smaller groups kind of get going.
Okay.
And then of course I have my day job and that takes up like a big chunk of time. And so everything else kind of has to fit within that.
Right.
And then you have to figure out how to keep your edge and, keep taking in content and
So one of the things that like I'm really curious about is how did you get from being the like 20-year-old college dropout who's touring with a band and making websites on the side to be not so much step by step how you got from
Totally.
there to here, but like why, at what point in that timeline or in that process did you go like, this is kind of my thing?
Yeah.
And this is something I want to explore and develop further.
Yeah, actually, like I remember early on I had, a couple of things. So I'll go back really far, but quickly. So I grew up with like a single mom who was a badass, and she worked construction. And so she hung off the side of bridges, grinded concrete, laid rebar.
Wow.
And I grew up like with the thought of like, my mom's stronger than your dad. Like that's one of the ways I coped with that, you know?
Yeah.
And we would go on field trips from, I don't know where we were, Albany in Oregon or Salem and up to Portland, to OMSI. We'd be on the big yellow school bus. And I remember like I would be looking for my mom working on the freeway, and like.
Oh, that's neat.
Yeah,
that's
cool. And I remember one time like in my memory, I saw her waving.
Sure, yeah,
Who knows? But like
could have been some random.
person, And
but...
so I grew up with like my mom was like worked really hard, and I remember like having to sleep in the back of her car at one point because like she couldn't find babysitters, so like we would go on the night site, right? Like that's how I grew up, and so I just had this like innate sense of. There's both a lot of privilege in where I'm at and the things we can do, but I also saw like my mom work really hard and struggle really hard for a long time. And so by the time I was in high school, like something happened where like a friend showed me how to program HTML. And then like I actually wanted to do video. That was like the thing that I was hoping to do. Turns out like video takes a lot of effort. It's really hard. And
ask these guys, right?
Yeah. And it was really expensive to go to the cool film school.
Oh, of course. Like, if you want to go to actual film school.
Yeah, we road tripped to Santa Barbara. I saw the Brooks Institute of Photography, visited, really cool. But like as a 18-year-old or whatever, it was like $54,000 a year or every 2 years. Whatever the money was, it was unimaginable.
Right.
And I was never on that path of like, you're going to go to college. I think it was more like, well, I hope you can get scholarships. We didn't really think about it yet.
Right.
And so that's kind of where we were. But in that path, like I had fallen in love with video, and then there was this moment where at the time there was flash animation, and I was like, oh, I can animate stuff and like make videos digitally. I don't need to like keep recording stuff off tape and whatever. So I had that epiphany that I could create things digitally, and like there's a lot of control in that. And so I really went down that path of designing and developing at the same time. And I just remember spending like hours and hours doing it because I loved it. Mm-hmm. And I think part of what happened is I got addicted to the feedback loop. When you do programming, you like make something and you hit a button or you don't hit a button, and like you instantly get to see the result of what you're making. Okay. So there's this really tight feedback loop that's like instant.
Right.
And I really like that a lot. And so somewhere in there I got addicted to like designing and developing stuff, and then that turned into a business, and then I thought, oh, I'll do a business, and I ended up basically because of the travels across the country, I ended up in Florida, and all my friends went to the Ringling College of Art and Design. I didn't. I worked at like a wheelchair lift company whose boss also made turbocharged like supercars. So Florida,
I want one of those wheelchairs.
Juxtaposition, yeah. And so I just talked a lot about design and learned a lot from them. And then we went on this trip to Seattle, and they came with me, and like there was this amazing poster conference of all things, and I was just like, Seattle is where design's happening. I need to go there.
Okay.
So I went to Seattle, and then like through that I got connected with just a lot of the cutting edge technology groups, and just got a lot of exposure to different ways that things work and in the land of business and design. And I remember having this epiphany early on. Like I'd always had these like little goals, and then you get the goal and you're like, I gotta have a new goal. Yeah. And one of them was like, I would love to be like the top 5% of designers in the world. Like I don't even know how you would measure that.
Right.
But then what I realized is that it doesn't matter from a business perspective. Like sort of depressingly, as a creative, at some point you realize like your craft is totally different than the business side. Mm-hmm. And so I worked at this agency who had a really cheesy name that I won't say the name of. They were like smaller. They're owned by a husband and wife, and I was like, got called in through some staffing firm, ended up working there, and they would just be pissed at each other, and they'd be arguing out loud, walking through the office, and I was like, what's going on?
Right.
But what I learned there was that the work that I was charging like $3,000 for, they were charging $30,000 for. And I was like, I can do better work than this, and I'm the one doing the work now. Like, why? Like, what's going on here? And from a pure business side, you could talk about overhead and all these things, but what it really comes down to is like sales. And so I went and got like a business mentor, and he taught me. I hired him, and he taught me like how you think about value in business and how you get confirmation with somebody about what they want first, speaking before sending them a contract. And like I just learned all these basics of business that I didn't know. I didn't have any business acumen. I'd just been making stuff and trying to sell it.
Right.
And that's like
thinking that was
the artist way. Like I'll make the best stuff ever and people will love it. But actually you can like you cannot make anything, and like you can be somebody that sells something because you understand what people want. And so I ended up learning more about the business side, and my business took off, and it was awesome. And I went to this event called Startup Weekend, and through some crazy connections there, I like designed and built this thing in like a couple of days. And then a friend of mine was like, well, now he's a really good friend of mine. He was like, can you come do that for us? Like we won this a couple months ago. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. And so that was like, unfortunately and unfortunately, a lot of times it ends up being who you know. And so a good friend of mine, Josiah, one time asked, it was a trick question. He was like, same thing, like, well, why are you successful in whatever, and whatever success means. But I felt like I was successful, and I started to explain how hardworking I was and how I'd done this thing for a long time, and I'd freelanced for 10 years. And he's like, no, you knew somebody. And it was just a reminder that like, okay, yeah, I am a hard worker, but the other 50% of it is like luck, and it's just like privilege and like where I'm at. And so I have been fortunate enough to like, even coming from humble beginnings, hardworking, but the other part is I bumped into the right people, and I had that opportunity. Right. And so I bumped into some of those people, and then once I was in the door, that allowed me to keep bumping into people, and keep moving up and figuring out like, I got to be part of really cool innovation teams early on, and the goal is always to like kind of make new things and break stuff and move quick. And so I just got to learn a lot in the creative technology space because of those opportunities. Yeah. So it's who I bumped into working hard one weekend in Portland. And then my mom. Those are probably the two things.
Right.
So
that work ethic came directly from your mom.
Yeah. And then the luck came because like, I guess, some sense of putting myself out there. And then like I was born in the year 1980 something, and lived in a time where there's computers, and so this worked out. Like, right. That's the other part of it. If I had been born 20 years early, of course, like the job titles I do now don't exist. So, like, it couldn't even have been possible. Which I always find fascinating. Like, like to put our timelines in the scale of time that's larger, and think about, what could be, or what would be different.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Is your mom still around? Is she?
Yeah, definitely. She ended up, she had rebar through her shoulder at one point doing construction, and she had, she was recovering from
that.
Yeah,
like,
and then
hate it when that happens.
They were in a truck going through like a barrier, and she ended up getting gasoline in her eyes actually as well.
Oh, Jesus.
And so, which normally you would not have any kind of open gasoline, it's just one of the, I don't exactly remember how it happened or why, but I definitely remember my mom coming home with bandages over her eyes for 3 weeks.
Oh my God.
And she recovered. She was, she can see mostly fine. She wears glasses or whatever. But that was, so she got injured, and then like when you hang off the side of bridges and you grind, it's real bad on your back. And so I just remember taking lots of drugs to get rid of the pain, and eventually it was like, she was too broken to keep doing that work. And so luckily at the time the company paid for her to go get an appraisal license, and she ended up sort of moving out of that into the space of appraisals, and that's what she does now.
Oh,
so,
wow. Okay.
yeah, so it worked out well, but not for pain or lack of pain.
Right.
Yeah. And so that's
it sounds
been
like
an
she
interesting industry.
is in a lot of ways kind of your, maybe not role model directly, but in terms of
Only if she's not watching this.
right.
Yeah.
But that you hold that memory in your head of the example she set.
Yeah, well,
and you kind of try to follow that.
Yeah, what's weird is like when you look back at your story, like, I don't know, we put it all together with a thread, right? So like, and then everything seems to have a meaning and a purpose. So that's like the meaning and purpose of where it comes from that I assign to, like, and just like as a kid and the memories I have, like that just makes sense. So there's always going to be a place where she sits in having given me a leg up from all the hard work that she did and all the pain. And also like I still have a lot of family members that like, I work on a computer all the day, all the while. all
the live long day.
But like that's not what all of my family does. Like a lot of people like are out sweating all the time. And so for any complaint I have, I also have to remember like I'm really fortunate to be able to like have time to read books and like think about stuff, and to be able to make things on a computer. Like there's so much that I'm like very fortunate for. So I think the other part of what happens is like I get to, it just gives me some perspective, right? Because like I don't know, I like for all the hardness of whatever I'm doing might be, there's different types of hardness, and I'm fortunate to be doing the hard work that I'm doing.
Right. I think that's a great way to put it, of like, yeah, it's hard work, but relative to hard physical labor, it's not.
Yeah, totally.
Or it's a whole different type of hard.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, exactly.
And when you were younger and you were sort of, you're like, I'm gonna move to Florida, I'm gonna move to Seattle, I'm gonna.
Yeah.
Was your mom, was your family, were they like, yeah, Ron, go for it? Or were they like, buckle down and get a real job? Or
yeah, so I had a mom and a really awesome stepdad. And I don't fully remember the conversation, but it was, yeah, go for it. If you want. I definitely have like the memory of like, you can do anything sort of in my mind, maybe that's the American way.
Right.
You could be president or, an astronaut.
You could go to Mars.
Yeah. I don't know. That's, there was definitely support for all of that. I don't know why, but there was. Like, I don't have any kids, but like thinking about like having kids, I'm like, man, that's one of the things I got to do which shaped my worldview is when I was younger and more connected to a religious group. I got the opportunity to go to Mexico, and we built a home there, and we like went to some prisons in California down on the way, and it really changed my worldview about like what it means to be. I don't know, it was right across the border, and people lived in huts and like shacks, and really, really changed my worldview of like how I think about immigration, or the compassion that like is generated from seeing that people live differently than you at a really young age. And I've definitely had that thought of like, oh man, like my mom was just like, cool, you're 15, you can go to Mexico. Like, I don't know, like to the middle of nowhere, like that's pretty cool. So I think that was known or unknown, I don't know, looking back, it was either encouraged, allowed, or tolerated, in some fashion.
Yeah. Like in the secret, they might have been like, oh dear God, this could go so wrong.
Yeah, I mean, there was definitely tears when I moved across the country, but there was no like barrier to doing it, yeah, so that was like early on. I had a lot of those experiences that helped shape my worldview and realize like, oh, people live differently than me, and yeah, so it was kind of wild. So I was allowed to explore and do a lot.
So is your mom, is she on the West Coast or East Coast?
She's here in Oregon. Yeah.
So she's here in Oregon.
Yeah.
Okay. So
and then the other cool thing, which if anybody knows me now, it's like annoyingly I brag about my sister now as well, because she ended up at NASA. And she has a whole story that should be told at some point.
Wow.
Yeah,
she was. To get her on the show.
I thought she was coming.
Hang on just 1 second. Come on in.
Yeah, this is that moment.
Right. This is your life, Ron Sparks.
Midday TV show. Yeah, so she was it's her own story to tell, but she was a makeup artist at a really high level, and then decided like that's not just what I want to do, and so she went back to school for physics, community college, like you would do.
Wow.
Studied that while working at the tan salon, and then like through a lot of experience and super hard work, she ended up in a place where she now is at mission control, and she is learning all the systems for the spacesuit so she can train astronauts, and she's learning how all the tools work so that anytime they're outside the ISS, like they're on call to solve problems or whatnot. So it's very strange to look at like this beginning of like a place where like my mom worked construction hanging off the side of bridges, and there was a point where we lived in a car, and now like to look at what my sister's doing, and which seems way more meaningful than any of the work I do now. I'm like, what am I doing with my life? You're helping astronauts. What am I doing? But it's cool to see like how that worked out for whatever reason,
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know what's going on there, but to me there's some common denominator of hard work infused in there, and then probably a lot of luck and a lot of sweat, and yeah.
And it sounds like tenacity too, of you just kind of keep going.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. And I don't know, I've had this last year, we talked about this at some point, but this last year I kind of had this moment where normally I'm the type of person that like wakes up early and I have something on my mind, and either like I have my most creative moments in the morning, and I'm like, I'm going to write some stuff, or I'm going to think on some things, or I'm going to work on that project. And then like, 8 o'clock rolls around, or 7:30, depends on when my team in the Ukraine needs me. Then I start work. And there was just like this period where I just wasn't waking up with any fire. It was like, okay, when do I have to get up,
Right.
And so I felt like that was a moment where I realized like, oh, I had this like internal ambition, almost at times that's annoying, and I don't know why that's there. And maybe it's just a personality trait. I'm not sure, but I have this drive, like I want to make stuff, and like that's satisfying. And I don't know why, but it's just a desire to make things.
Right.
And so when that was gone, it felt like, oh, something's wrong. Something's off. It wasn't just like, oh, I'm relaxing. It was like, oh, like I'm losing something that's like part of me, and I had to like reevaluate what was going on.
And what was it? I mean, how did you just kind of lose that spark for a while, or you lost the opportunity to be creative, or? No,
I think honestly I was like, last year was super hard on the work front, and both satisfying the stuff we made, but it was like I was like nearing burnout, and I just didn't have additional time to really consistently put into creating stuff because I was just working so much. Mm-hmm. And so the whole team that I work with is incredible. They all work a ton, and I also had my days where it was like you'd wake up early to talk to one side of the country, you'd work during the day, and then talk to Japan in the evening. And so like that's a full day, and you go into the evening pretty late sometimes. And when you're trying to ship a product with that many people and you're the small group doing these amazing things, it's satisfying, but it's a lot of work. Right. And so I was just running nonstop, and after a while I think that I was just nearing that burnout, or maybe I was burnt out, I don't know, but I was still going. And so then it was like I need to adjust some things in my life so that I can have the desire to keep learning and keep making and those sorts of things. So that's, yeah.
And so was that, how did you make that adjustment? I think that's a thing that a lot of people deal with, is hitting that point where
I've got a product, Charlie, I wanted to show you. It's these.
Right, well, hold on 1 second.
Yeah, I'm glad we finally got here.
Right.
I have a book and a pack of pills. It's 2 payments.
With your 30-day program.
Yeah.
30-day to creative success with Ron Sparks.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, like how do you, I think it's something tons of people deal with, of like, they have their creative side project or side hustle or whatever, the day job pays for that, or gives them the money and time to do it. But the day job can also be the thing that fries your brain too much to be
or
creative.
you work on a side project and then it just, it doesn't work, right? So like you're putting a lot of time on both ends of that, and then you're just like, okay, well, why am I doing all this? So you get some of those questions, like, what's the point? So yeah, I think for me, step one was just like being aware, like, oh, this thing's happened. Like at some point, I don't know when, but I realized like, oh, I've my drive has dropped on like making stuff. Yeah. So like just noticing that, rather than like it starts out, you just have that incremental, like, oh, I'm sleeping in more. Oh, I'm sleeping more. Oh, I'm not working on this thing. Oh, I'm not being consistent anymore. And so at some point I noticed that. And then I knew myself enough to be able to connect it to like, oh, that's a deficit. It's not just a normal thing. And then, I don't know, I tried a bunch of stuff like to fix it, right? And so some of it is like taking a break. Some of it was, I don't know, changing the way I eat, running more, those sorts of things. Just like I was becoming so focused on just work and making stuff that there's other things in life you need to take care of. Right. And I wasn't like taking care of those things at all. So like my day was 100% full of making things for my day job or for other people or for myself. And like for a time that can be really cool, but not all the time. Yeah. And so I started to need, like, one of the words that I have not figured out yet, but I've been thinking about is like boundaries. Like, where are my boundaries of like where, like, hey, it's okay, I'm offline for 30 minutes and I need to take care of myself a little bit. But we live in this world where, like, a lot of people work remote, or they work with teams all over the world, or the internet is on all the time. So it's like there's no time where the internet sets like the sun does, right? Like it's just on all the time, 24/7.
Like at 6 p.m. you're like, and the internet turns off.
That would be great. Like, the day's over. We got to take a break. I don't know who controls the internet, but we should work on that.
There should be like
at least one day a week where there's off. The internet just goes off. So I don't know. I've been working on that, right? It's like a work in progress, and then you get really excited about something and you want to go again. But like we talked, like, I have a wife as well, and she's also really creative, and so like there's things we want to work on together as well, and like build things together. And if all my time is sucked into my work and then like all these side things, then I don't have time for that, and then that's going to suffer. So I don't know, like somebody at one point talked about not just like work-life balance, but like how do you integrate more of that? And so I think that's part of it. Like my day job has a lot of the things I like to think about around technology or being creative, and so my day job is something I really care about, and it's an outlet for a lot of the creativity and work I get to do. Not all of it, which is why I have to do other things. And likewise, those aren't a full outlet, like because they don't have maybe some relational component. And then there's hanging out with my wife, Julia, and like building things with her and having time to like make things and imagine things. And so, it's like tricky to have all those things and figure out like, okay, is there my personality that I can integrate into each of these things? And really, right now, the day job and my wife are very consistent. So it's all that stuff in between that I have to figure out how to manage correctly, or not let the, it's just managing that.
Like when you had that year or whatever it was of just feeling burned out and feeling unmotivated to get out of bed and stuff, part of waking up to that was that like due to your wife? Was your wife like, Ron, like we're not connecting, we're not talking, we're not, that is usually where things suffer, right? It's always like the marriage or your family.
Yeah, so I don't know. I think there definitely was the like, hey, we don't have time together. Yeah. That was part of it. And the other challenge was that like our work schedules were such that we only had one day off together every week, which just sucks. So we only had one day off, and so that was the day where, if we wanted to go on any kind of outdoor adventures here in Oregon, that was the one day. But also that was the only day we had to work on, fixing up the house, cleaning things, fixing things. So it was like, a lot to shove in one day, too much. And so now, luckily, that's changed, and we actually have multiple days off together. We have weekends. This is crazy, and that's actually been surprisingly helpful for me and like having time. So it wasn't anything too specific, but I think that was part of it. Is like just noticing like, oh, like I'm just working all the time, or I'm working on stuff all the time. And so now it feels like, yeah, I go really intense during the week. And I kind of now expect that there's 3 or 4 nights sometimes where I'm working late with the international crew. But I also know now that I have some other windows that are more chunked out, and I own some other time on the weekend a lot more firmly with her, which is really good. But for me, a lot of that creative time is like, before I got married, it was like late in the evening, right? And probably just a younger component too, like you're just up all night till 2 a.m. And then after I got married, that sort of changed, and then it became, well, the morning was the time because I want to have that evening rhythm with my wife. And then in the morning, it was like, well, I'm going to wake up earlier then because I still didn't need as much sleep sometimes. And so I could wake up before everybody else. And then that was like my window to do stuff where the world was quiet. And so really what happened was like that early morning window went away, and I just like slept or worked later and then slept. It was sort of weird because it's sort of something that was like my little sacred space that just kind of evaporated. And so, you know, nobody else is really going to notice that because it's just gone. And for anybody else, it's just like, oh, you're sleeping like a normal person. Good for you.
But you're like, no, this is a bad thing.
Yeah, sleep is terrible. No. So it really felt like that like little space just evaporated. And it was like trying to figure out like, okay, how do I get this space back, or get the desire to have that space back? And I think, you know, everybody has the thing or things that work for them, which is again why I wrote this book. No, I'm just kidding. So for me, like I realized like I just need to exercise, and I've tried a bunch of stuff, and I like running was just the thing that like if I can just chip away at that, then I feel better mentally. It's not really about like physical health; it's just about mental health. So like we talked this morning, and I was like, yeah, I made sure to go for a little run this morning because I know that like it helps clear my head. You know, so runs or walks, or if I'm working on a hard problem, that stuff just helps a lot rather than buckling down and staring at it and, you know, whatever the problem is.
Do you do any kind of like meditation or anything like that, or is your running?
Like 8 times a day, every 20 minutes? No.
What's that? Like, hang on.
Yeah, exactly.
Go into my space.
No, I've tried. I think it's cool. I wish that there's just only so many things I can focus on.
Yeah, right.
So I've tried Headspace. Somebody recommended 10% Happier, an app to me. I downloaded it. I haven't even opened it. I have a creative mentor who is definitely like very well versed in yoga, and so I've done some creative like retreat or work with him, and like seen some of these small concepts dropped in, and that's been really cool and really fascinating. And you know, I've taken a couple things from that, which is great. You know, breathe, like, you know, the power of just breathing and helping to like calm yourself down has been cool. But I don't have like a practice of meditation. And that's the other thing is like, when you start trying to solve a problem, I don't know if you've done this, but like, you're like, I'm going to make myself better by doing 12 things.
Right, yes.
Alcohol is out, sugar's out, running's in, CrossFit's in, weightlifting's in, no TV, no internet.
Only going to take up 22 hours a day.
Yeah, and then you have a checklist of all the things you won't do and 3 things you will, and you do nothing. Or you do it all for 4 days and then everything explodes.
And then you never do any of it again.
Yeah, and so like I know this now from having done that many times. So now it's like, okay, I'm going to start with like just this one thing. I'm going to just have that one thing consistent, and then once that's there, I'll let the rest of it kind of figure itself out. So yeah, meditation was just one of those things that was like, that's cool. I can't, you know, add that to the list of things I'm trying to do.
But the one thing you do make time for is roasting coffee, yeah?
Nope, I don't know what you're talking about. yeah.
I was like, wait.
Wrong person.
Wrong.
Yeah.
Sorry, my bad.
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, I don't know exactly what happened. I worked at cafes for a long time, but it was just one of those things where like a lot of people, I love coffee. When I worked at eBay, there's like a small group of people that had popcorn makers, and you could make coffee in the old school popcorn makers. And so like I jumped on the bandwagon, bought this like Western something popcorn maker, had a switch on it. And then what you could do is you change like one wire on the back. So when you plug it in, the heat turns on. So the heat's always on as soon as you plug this thing in, and then the toggle is just for the air. Or no, it's the other way around. It doesn't matter, but you plug it in, the air's on, and then the heat toggles, and you can roast coffee with these things.
In an old school
yeah,
popcorn
it's just like a tube, and then like in the tube there's heat and air, and that makes it move around.
Yeah.
And so you could toggle the heat on and off. So you drop the beans in and they just churn. So anyways, I learned how to do that, and then I made some terrible coffee and I made some great coffee. And I was like, this is really cool. And so I just kept going down that road, and now I have like this 1 kilo gas roaster that rolls out in my garage, and I make coffee for myself and some neighbors, and it's just really fun to do something that is the opposite of technology. And also the other thing, in the land of like programming or making software, it's never done. It's just ready. Like that's one of the terms, like when you ship something in software, it's not done. It's just ready to ship because it's going to change. And other art forms aren't necessarily like that. Like you can finish a painting or you can finish a photo and it can be done. You can finish editing a video and it's done. But in the land of software, you're always going back and revisiting. It's this living thing, which is awesome and super annoying all at the same time, because it's never done. You're just ready. So coffee is something that can be done, and I like that. So I can be done making coffee, and I really like the ability to like give it to someone and they experience it and it's done. I work a lot in these experiences that are like ongoing, continuous experiences. They're like game levels that you keep coming back to and playing, and like you think of all these story arcs, and it's super interesting, but it's also like never done. So I really found it was enjoyable to like go down the rabbit hole deep on something that wasn't technology related and get into like how coffee's grown, the fact it's a cherry, and like whole economies run on it. It's the second most traded commodity in the world. Like there's all these interesting things about coffee. And it's something I consume every day. It's something a lot of people do. And so it was fun to be able to make something and give it away as a pure gift. And there's like nothing else attached to it. I don't really sell it. I've sold it a few times and was like, it's not what I want to do. Like, I don't want to own a coffee business. I just like making coffee.
Ron's Coffee Roast.
Yeah, exactly. So that was the other.
Your franchise.
Yeah,
franchise.
Franchise. Coffee not for sale, a franchise. So
is it also the thing, the fact that you're making a physical product, this thing that then you can literally give it physically to someone else?
It's super cool. And like I've got a stamp. I put the stamp on the bag. It looks fun.
Yeah.
Hush Hush Coffee, here you go. Like that's great. And then like I had a couple of friends and I would ask for reviews. So I had really simple questions, which were like, could you drink it? Did you like it? Would you drink it again? Those are my like questions. And that's because I'm like the user experience, like design side of me wants to like get the feedback and make it better. And so a couple of my really good friends would like send me videos of them trying the coffee and sampling. And I was like, this is great. Like it's so satisfying to like make something, have somebody experience it and be done. It's fun to make something that I made the mobile game back in the day, and it was cool to like have my nephew or other kids use it, and it had like 7,000 downloads, and like there was no payment, there's no ads, so it was really fun just to like give something away. And I think maybe that's probably my own personal like pendulum swing back against what I'm making in the day job, right? It's just like, cool, let's just give something away because I can, and let's like have an experience that's sort of done when it's done, and that's it. So it's like the opposite of what I have to do during the day, maybe. Right. Yeah, and it tastes good.
When it goes well,
right? Now I'm good at it. I'm not amazing, but I'm good enough to where it's always good. And then the trick is, can I make it great?
Right.
Yeah, so it's pretty fun. Yeah.
So what is it that you see for yourself, like for you, for your wife, for the family you've created together? Like, where does it go from here? Do you see as like some radical change in direction, or is it
#van life? No, I'm just kidding.
Mobile coffee roasting van life.
We're moving to England. I'm gonna meet with the Duchess. Take over the world. You mean like what's my personal?
Yeah, like, I mean, is it continue to move through this world that you're already immersed in, and see if you can move the needle a little like in terms of how it affects people, or or is it a whole new direction? Do you see this as kind of, are there turning points that you see coming up?
I mean, what's so hard is like if you look back like 5 years ago or 10 years ago and you look forward and you say like, did I think I'd be doing it all what I'm doing now? I feel like most of the time it's like, no, I didn't know that.
Right.
So, for whatever I would guess I would be doing in 5 years, I'm kind of like, I don't know.
Probably be wrong.
Yeah. There's a really cool, I can never remember his name. His first name is Chuck, but it's a book called Looking at the, I don't remember the title, but because it's kind of a weird title, but it's basically like looking at now as if it was the past.
Okay.
From like a future concept. It's very strange, but he basically just goes through and points out how like nothing turns out how you think it should, and like the reason people become famous is not because of merit, it's just because of like how we remember culture and stuff. So in my own life, I kind of assume like that's probably what's going to happen. I'll get somewhere and then I'll remember like what happened and sort of make up a story of why it works so well. But I don't know. So for now, what I hope to do is keep pushing on some of those ideas, find interesting questions, and the world right now, it seems to be the consensus is like it feels a little dark, and part of me feels like it's dark, but there's also so much good. There's a book called Factfulness that's pretty amazing, and it points out actually how amazing the world is now, and how like women 200 years ago could vote in 3 countries, and now it's the opposite. Every country but 3, and like literacy rates off the charts, longevity has gone up. Like there's all these like really good things that have happened on a global scale at a long time frame. But
like global poverty has actually decreased massively, and global hunger and all these things that were true crises like 30 years ago.
And it's hard. It's
like they're still
hard
problems,
to feel that.
they're still there, but they are a fraction of the size they once were.
And part of that is probably because like as people, everywhere, the further along you go, there's always like more that can be done or better that could happen. And so I don't know where I'm going with that exactly, but it feels like things are a little bit dark, and I try to remind myself that actually there's a lot of good still happening, and that like, why do I think the world's so dark? It's because I'm told that that's what's happening all the time, because that's what gets my eyeballs and that's what sells ads.
Right. It's the darkness that gets play.
Yeah, so I'm trying to like figure out like, one is just remember some of the goodness in the world, see if there's a better world that I can be a part of making, or ideas that shape that, then like, cool, like I would love to be part of pushing that forward. I don't know how to do that. So at this point it's just like, let's write down some ideas and share with people and see what gets picked up. And maybe some of those ideas become, part of the next conversation that leads to something. And that's where like the doubt as an artist might come in, where you start this thing like, well, does that matter? Does that really help? It's like, I don't know, but what else am I going to do? Like not do that? So I might as well try something. So I guess I'm just going to keep pushing and iterating in that space of ideas. And then as far as like, family goes, it's weird. Like part of it feels like I need to make sure I enjoy the outdoors and, have a good time here. But that's also like the Bend, we're in Bend. So it's like a little bit of the Bend culture is weird in that, like the hustle level sometimes feels like much lower. The joke when I moved here, like there's 2 things people said, like, 5 years ago or whatnot, was bring your job, and like Bend full time is 2 days a week or 3 days a week. I was like, what? And I think it's just because we've got a lot of people coming to visit, the natural beauty here, and it's a cool place or whatnot. But like that's not like I don't want to live like a partially retired life type thing. So that's not at all my goal. Is just to like relax and hang out, like enjoy what's here. It's great, and also push forward on some of these ideas and find like a meaningful project to push into. On that front, we talked about it a little bit, and this is, I think, maybe just interesting. Like there was some stuff that I was making where I think I was in this pattern of making stuff because I felt like I had to prove myself.
Okay.
And so like in the land of technology, there's like, we've got all this lore now and all this myths about like great companies, and that's sort of this thing that's held up. And so I think some of the projects that I was working on was pushing on that, like, oh, I need to prove that I can make something from the ground up, and that's how I'll prove myself. And now I kind of feel like I don't really need to do that at all. So it's shifted, like the type of project I want to work on is no longer needs to be like to prove myself as worthy of being able to make a thing.
Right.
I just need to go make things I think are valuable, which is weird. Like that's part of the, when you make stuff, are you pandering to the audience or making for yourself,
Right,
or what's
right.
that space in between? So
When I wanted to, you were talking just a second ago about like that challenge of the creative experience of pushing into your creativity. I can't remember exactly what you said, but it was something about
starting to sound good, whatever you were saying.
like pursuing creativity as both like career and profession, but also avocation and vocation and.
Oh yeah. So one of the things that when I left the freelance sort of world and was like full-time career, I still had this one bit was like, I don't want my identity to be my job. Because if I lose my job, which will probably happen at some point, I don't want my identity to be gone, which
and
is
self-worth.
And my self-worth,
yeah.
which is pretty selfish, weird way to think about it, rather than just like my identity should not be my job. But my thought process was like, I want to protect myself emotionally. Yeah, so one of the questions that came out of, that line of thinking is like, well, what do I do, right? Not what do I do for work, but like, what do I do as a person? And so I started hunting for that arc of whether it's in my job or in my creative projects, like, what do I do? Like, what am I doing here? And what you realize is like, that's this like question where you can do anything. Like you get to pick your purpose. Like it feels like there's gonna be a purpose, and if I hunt for it, I'll find it. And then at some point it was like, nope, I just have to pick a purpose, and then if that becomes kind of, something that I'm not in tune with as much, or I no longer want to do, then I'll have to change my purpose again and reevaluate. Okay. So that's, I don't know, that's, I kind of came to that question and then started looking at like, what do I do as a person? And then worked with a mentor and kind of started honing in that question to figure out like, how could I operate as a creative in the day job and outside of it? And like, how do those two things link together?
I mean, that's big, important stuff, though. Like,
yeah.
I mean, for anyone who has any creative inclination, urges, that's the big question, right? Of
like
how do you make your creativity your job, which can become bad,
right?
Do you make do you work a regular job to feed the creativity?
Right. I think there's both. Like I'm fortunate enough to do something where it's maybe more upfront that I get to be creative or work in technology. I've had other jobs that are very much not creative or whatnot, but you can get into them still, and like principles of like caring or making a good experience, like those for me, like I could infuse those ideas into almost any work I do still. Whether it's building a house or building a product, like you could still infuse that idea. Now, if it's closer to something I want to do, it's probably a lot easier to keep that up.
Right.
And sometimes a job is just a job, and sometimes the job that I have now is just a job. Like I just got to get it done, and that's okay. That's kind of the way it has to be. Mm-hmm. So, but it is, I don't know. Yeah, that connection of like I'm one person in my job and out of my job, and that was another realization actually. Now that I'm saying that I had at one point where. Like sometimes you focus really hard on being like a good leader in your job, or being really good at conversation in your job, or being really good at hearing people in your job, and then you go home or you're around friends or your wife and you're like, oh, I'm not like actively trying to be a good leader, or I'm not actively trying to like be the best communicator I can be. And like suddenly your personality becomes like sort of the characteristics are like really focused in the career space, but they're maybe not as polished in outside of that. Mm-hmm. So maybe there's some desire for consistency or to bring the best attributes from both those worlds and like cross them over, so that like I can be good as a communicator in my job and outside of my job, and then like I'm doing my work as an artist sometimes in my job and hopefully sometimes out of my job.
Those skills you just talked about, like that's key stuff for relationships and marriages, of like being a good communicator and being a good listener, and and bringing that skill set from work to home too.
Yeah, which I don't always do, that's for sure.
Julia would attest to that.
Yeah, so I don't know, I'm just like hunting for a way, like, ultimate, like, sort of ridiculous desires to like push human thinking forward, just like one little tiny needle. I'd love to be a part of that.
It's an incredible desire.
Yeah, like just like let's make stuff a little better, and the way to do that is I can have all the ideas in the world, but if I don't put them out there or contribute to this like global knowledge set, then I'm like, there's no way that's ever going to happen. So that's one part of it, is I just want to push things forward just a touch. And then, what I realized is I also want to like, I like making stuff. Like there's no reason for it. I've had that conversation about like, what is art and why do we make things? And I kind of just like was like, cause I like to. Like that's fine.
Right.
And there's other people that like to also, and I like to work with those people to help them make their things as well. It's just really satisfying. And I don't always understand why, but if that's what it is, then like, well, cool, let's just keep moving there because it is satisfying. So yeah, pushing forward on those creative fronts and figuring out how to do it as like, some consistent fashion between your personal life and your job life, and
right.
Yeah, which is hard to do, and you can burn out on one or the other pretty easily sometimes.
I feel like that's a pretty good place to put a pin in things at this point.
Yeah, I think so.
But
yeah.
I also wanted to ask, because we referenced books or a book before, and I love to read and I love books. Are there any books you recommend, or even blogs or videos or whatever that you recommend as
besides my own
thing? Yeah, besides yours and besides this particular show. Those are the top of the list.
There's two
and
books.
And it's ronsparks.com, right?
Hyphen. I have to have a hyphen. I'm not rich enough to own the full one. ron-sparks.com.
Ron-sparks.com.
Yeah, there's two books that instantly jump to mind. One is called The True Believer by Eric Hoffer.
Okay.
I read it. It was a book written in the 40s or 50s or something, and it's a look at why people follow movements. And I just think it's super fascinating in our time because it allows you to maybe understand more of what's happening with why people follow things, religions, and leaders. And I don't know why, but that book has really stuck with me. So it's called The True Believer. I picked it up by accident. And the other thing I love about the book is that the guy that wrote it, Eric Hoffer, his like little story is that apparently he was like blind as a kid, at some point gained his eyesight back, and was like started reading everything he could, and then he never lost his eyesight, and so he just kept it, and he ended up being a longshoreman in San Francisco, but he wrote this amazing philosophy book being a longshoreman. And I can't speak to like all his work if it's all good, but that book just I thought was really cool, and I read it before everything kind of got more contentious in our culture, and it really helped me sort of see some of the things that were going on for like more clearly, like, oh, these are the tactics that are being used. But it was written like 50, 60 years ago. So I found that really interesting. So that's Eric Hoffer, True Believer. The other book is Factfulness, and I'm gonna say his name wrong, so I can't remember, but if you Google Factfulness, the book, you'll find it.
That should come up.
It was recommended to me, and I was like, okay, I'll check it out. There's, like any book, there's gonna be things that you disagree with or whatnot, but it was really amazing and eye-opening for like, here is like how we should think about the levels of economy in the world of like, it's not first world, third world anymore. There's 4 levels, and here's why, and here's the difference. And it's explained like when you're on that top level of economic status in the world, which we are as Americans, you look down and you just think everything's the same below us. Everything else is poverty. So it really breaks that down to like the impact of what it means to go from a couple dollars or no dollars a day, not having shoes, to having shoes, to having a bike, to having a car, and like the doubling of those money and the difference in those economies and what it really means. And the same thing with like beds and cooking, and like, so these different economic levels. And then he points out how it's not just about like the West versus the East, like the notion of like how healthcare works and how happiness and economy works, like it is not an East versus West type of thing. Like those metrics are spread all over the world now. And so it really helps you like understand from a point of facts, like how the world has really changed. So yeah, both those books are really good, and they kind of have informed some of my thinking and in a way given me a little bit of hope also. So yeah.
Wow, that's awesome. And we'll make sure to put links to those books in the description of the video and stuff.
Cool. And neither of them are like on the creative front, like per se, in quotes, but like if you're a creative person, then everything's going to feed into your creativity. So I think it's fine.
That's a fantastic point, actually.
Yeah.
Okay, so where, if people want to find out more about you and they want to read more about what you're up to, where?
Text me. No, just phone number.
Here, let me just give out your personal phone number.
Yeah, probably my website's fine.
Okay.
They can email me, ron@ron-sparks.com.
Okay.
So, website's probably the best way to find and connect.
Great.
Or through you, it's fine.
Yeah, and of course we'll put links to that in the video as well.
Yeah, cool.
Very cool. Thanks, Ron. I mean, I think I now understand a little bit about what you actually do.
I make software.
Yeah.
And then I think about things.
And you think about.
I try to be creative.
Kind of like Tyrion Lannister in Game of Thrones. Like he drinks wine and thinks.
That's that's what I aspire to. There's what I am and what I aspire to.
Like you make things and you drink coffee.
Yeah, exactly. Although maybe I
and
should
you
switch
think
to
about
wine.
Things.
Yeah.
Cool.
Cool.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, thanks, Charlie.